Good afternoon. My name is Haley Glover with Lumina Foundation, and I'm very pleased to kick off our webinar in support of the Lumina Fund for Racial Justice and Equity. You're joining this webinar because you're expressing interest in the RFP we released earlier this week, and it's our hope that this webinar covers some of the basic information you'll need to complete that proposal. Today, we'll be covering 4 key areas: the rationale and objectives of this work, some parameters for what we'd like to support and grant proposal guidelines, intended outcomes of this work, what we'd like to see accomplished as a result of this investment, and key dates, things that you should know. We'll also be addressing questions that came in during the webinar, and we will follow those up with a detailed frequently asked questions document, which will be available on our website shortly. So, Lumina views work to improve outcomes for students from African American, American Indian, Hispanic backgrounds as primary to our work. As we have said in various publications, we view this equity imperative is not just an aspect of our work or a component of our work, it is our work. And so as we've viewed the events over the last year plus, it's been dismaying and disturbing in many ways. And the events in Charlottesville in particular had a big impact on us, and particularly because they were taking place on a college campus. We know that colleges and universities can be drivers of change in their communities and in their states. And it's for that reason that this investment is targeting directly colleges and universities in order to support them to hasten and deepen their work to improve outcomes and to create campus climates that are far more friendly, opening, welcoming, and engaging to students who may otherwise feel marginalized and left behind. That is the intent of this work. It's very special to us because we took unprecedented action with our board of directors to make it happen. We actually approached our board to request a special allocation, special pull down from our endowment in order to fund this grant. And that was how important we think this work is. And we're very excited to be launching a $1 million investment for the Lumina Fund for Racial Justice and Equity with our partners from the Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. And we are hoping with these resources to spur colleges and universities to really advance and deepen their work to improve their campus climates, like I said, to make them more engaging, welcoming, opening to students, as well as to advance equitable outcomes. Our work is really dedicated to the idea of post-secondary attainment, which means that students don't just get in the door of the college or university, they get out with a high-quality post-secondary credential. We think that's incredibly important, not just because these students are more likely to go on and become gainfully employed, they're more likely to go on and earn family-sustaining wages. They're also more likely to be contributing members of society in their communities. And what we really want to see is outcomes on college and university campuses that ensure that students have every opportunity to connect to the institution, to the wonderful life-changing efforts that take place on college and university campuses across the nation. And that's done in a very equitable way. And that is why we are doing this work. Eligible grantees include post-secondary institutions. We are not looking necessarily to support community organizations or nonprofit organizations that do work in this space. We are hoping, however, to see a vast array of post-secondary institutions represented amongst the final grantees. We would love to see every sector represented, and by sector I mean community colleges and four-year institutions, regional comprehensive universities, as well as R1 institutions, tribal colleges, HBCUs, HSIs. We really want to see the vast array of institutions out there represented in our final grantees. And we are committed to reviewing every application that comes in to ensure that we have a good read on what is proposed across all of those institutions. We are supporting 2 grant levels. The first is up to $100,000. We anticipate supporting 4 or 5 grantees at this level. These grantees will be doing highly sophisticated, accelerated work and have already made progress in implementing really strong plans to advance racial justice and equity across their campuses. The remaining resources will be utilized for grants up to $25,000 for many institutions. And these can support efforts for institutions that are maybe not as far down the path as others in implementing their equity-based work, but are still advancing strong, significant plans. We will be, like I said, be reviewing every application. And so we encourage you to consider where you stand on that spectrum. If you believe you are doing, incredibly significant, well-advanced work that has really taken root, please do go ahead and indicate you'd like to compete for that $100,000 mark. If you are early in your work, please do indicate you'd like to participate at that $25,000 mark. In the event you apply for that larger grant and are not competitive for that, we will consider you at that $25,000 mark. So you do not need to complete 2 proposals for the grant. Just come in at the level that you think reflects your work most accurately. The grants are very flexible and can support a variety of activities, including community and campus forums. We're actually very excited about the potential for you to partner with your local community, whether that be the neighborhood in which your campus is based, or the city, or even the region, knowing that many of the campuses represented here today serve a very large area of the country. You can do staff, faculty training and development, bringing in consultants to provide training and educational opportunities to your staff and faculty. Similarly, you can do student training and development. You can do campus-wide programming, and you can do other thoughtfully designed efforts. What we want to make sure we do here is open up the field. You will have exceptional ideas, we know, and we could not list all of them. So please just put together your ideas, your best possible ideas about what you think will make the most difference for your campus itself, and submit them, and we would love to see them. Like I said, was diverse as the institutions will be in the final set of grantees. We want them to represent every sector. We would love to see an incredibly diverse array of work happening across those campuses, because part of our objectives for this work too are to learn from you. We do want to understand what works for you, what happened on your campus, why did it work, and how did you make it work, and we will be learning from you the entire time. One moment. The intended outcomes of this work, as I mentioned earlier, are continuing to develop and strengthen your campus climates that support equity and racial justice. We want to support colleges and universities to undertake work that will improve your climate and build more open, accepting, safe, and equitable environments. We want to help you gain greater ground in your existing efforts to advance equity on your campus, and ultimately, we believe that doing those things should and must translate into improved outcomes for students and the elimination of attainment gaps. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Lumina views attainment as what happens when students gain access to post-secondary education and learning, and what happens when they complete post-secondary education and learning. Access without success is a broken promise. And so when we are talking about a relatively short-term grant here, approximately 1 year, we fully understand that you will not see a huge increase in completions coming out of your work. However, what we do hope is that your work is spurred and really creates deep, meaningful efforts on campus that do have long-term impact on student retention from first to second year, second to third, et cetera, as well as improvements in student completion. But of course, we are totally understanding of the fact that you will not see a bump in those completions as a result of this work directly, immediately. Some key dates to be available, or to be aware of. The due date for the application itself is February 26, 2018 at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, and that is 12 p.m. noon, not midnight, Eastern Time. These applications should come electronically, including all appendices and the completed narrative proposal, and should go to our colleague Meenakshi Abi, who is our key point over at Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. Her email is listed here and is also listed in the proposal. Under the email subject, Lumina Fund Proposal. We anticipate that we will receive many proposals as a result of this RFP, and we can't wait to read them all. We do reserve the right to adjust this planned notification date of the week of April 9th based on the number of proposals we get and how quickly we can move through them and really review them thoroughly. But as I said right now, we do anticipate we'll be able to notify campuses of their status in the project by the week of April 9th, and then release funds the week of April 23rd once grant agreements are signed. These are sort of the key dates that you need to know, and will also be available, of course, over the next 6 weeks or so until the RFP is due to answer any kind of questions. So speaking of questions, we'll pivot to those right now. Some questions about grant parameters and guidelines. Will you accept multiple proposals from the same institution? The answer to that question is no. We would prefer to not receive multiple proposals from the same institution. Of course, your application and your proposal can absolutely reflect work happening across multiple departments of the institution, but we absolutely don't want this proposal to create competition between those departments and programs. So please limit your applications to one per institution. As I mentioned earlier, another question came in about whether an institution should submit 2 proposals, one for the $100,000 level and one for the $25,000 level. No, as I said, please just indicate in your proposal what level you think is best reflective of your work. If you are not successfully competitive for the $100,000 level, and that's where you applied for, we will absolutely consider you for that $25,000 level, and that will be just fine. Could it be a student group, for example, a student government association that receives funding? I would say absolutely. That would be an incredibly interesting project. However, as a student government leader, if that is your particular perch in this space, you would need the authorization of your campus, as they would be the recipient of grant funds. So please just work with your campus to make that happen. Are there particular geographic regions that Lumina Foundation is interested in? That answer is absolutely not. We would love to see every geography in the country represented, east to west, north to south, and everywhere in between. So we are not particularly interested in one state over another or one metro over another. Please just go ahead and apply if you think you're ready. We have some questions here about collaboration. We are a district of 3 community colleges. Will you accept a proposal from a district, or do we prefer each campus to apply separately? Alternatively, we've got a question about whether a 2- and 4-year institution collaboration might apply. And the answer to that question is we would love to see consortium or collaboratives of institutions apply together. That would be incredible. Lumina loves collaborative work, and we love to see what happens when 2 organizations can come together and create work that's bigger than the sum of its parts. So those types of proposals would be very competitive, we believe. Should you consider, here's another question, should you consider working with national partners or nonprofit groups for particular work? Our answer to that question is that we are prioritizing here building the strength and capacity and ownership of equity work on campuses directly. So what we don't necessarily want to support is an outside organization or other group coming in and, say, planting a program on your campus. That said, if your work requires the support or the technical assistance of one of these organizations and is about building your capacity, the campus's capacity to do the work, then absolutely, that's just fine. Include them in your proposal. But what we don't want to do is focus much on programmatic implementation that goes outside of the capacity that you're bringing to this work directly. Can the work on specific demographic groups, such as young men of color? Absolutely. Your work should be guided by your priorities, and what we are going to be really looking for, particularly in your data and in your rationale for this project, is why you think that targeting specific demographic works will result in improved campus climate and improved outcomes. And if that is in line with your strategic priorities and that is in line with your capacity and competencies, absolutely we would love to see work that targets particular populations. We have another question here. Is equity necessarily racial? Can you target non-racial equity groups? So certainly this is a question that is really actually quite important. The specific target zone of this work is in support of racial justice and equity, and therefore we will be requiring for this particular project a focus on racial equity. And I think that is just about as clear as we can be. So we're not looking necessarily, even though we know that there are many overlaps with other groups that are underserved and under-resourced with those populations, we do want to make sure that this work particularly focuses on racial justice and equity. We have another question here. Can funding go toward wider distribution of a currently successful program? And by this, I think what the questioner is asking is, can this work support scaling to other campuses of a program that has worked well on a single campus? And the answer here is not as clear as probably you want it to be, but is a maybe. What we're really trying to do here is to build campus capacity for improving climate and outcomes. And therefore, we want to make sure that the work being proposed is work that will be done by the campus. Now, in a collaborative environment, say you've got 2 or 3 institutions in the same general area who want to take something from one of those collaborative partner institutions and translate it to their own campuses, that's certainly something we would love to see, something we'd be rather interested in. But we're not talking about scaling to many institutions outside of that sort of partnership zone, sort of the spread and scale of individual campus programs beyond those campus borders. I hope that makes sense. Please don't hesitate to reach out for greater clarity, and we can walk through that particular question. Outcomes and reporting. This is a great question, and folks have several questions about this in terms of the time and whether this may be a one-time investment for Lumina. So first, the scale of this project is about a year. We think by April we'll be able to release the funds, and then your reports would be due per your grant agreement roughly 1 year later. So the scope of work is not intended necessarily to support very long engagement. We think there's a lot of potential to do catalytic work over a relatively short time to make a difference. And so the scale of the project is about 1 year from the grant signature day. We will, in terms of reporting, ask you to do some relatively light things. We'll ask you to explore what worked and what didn't, what changed and what didn't, as well as how you knew things did or did not change. And so we'll create a reporting template for you that will be pretty clear in terms of what we're asking for in terms of reporting and your outcomes. What we'd also like to do, though, and as I mentioned earlier, Lumina is using this opportunity as a learning opportunity. We will be, once we finally assess the proposals and have in hand the grantees that will be moving forward, we will be developing a communications plan. We would love then to highlight your work. We think it's very important to place a spotlight on institutions that are doing proactive, significant work to improve their campus climates and outcomes. And so we will be in touch to ask you for video, for pictures, for commentary, as well as potential convenings and other venues for communicating what you're up to. We think that's very important, that many other institutions and many other partners know what you're doing, and so they can learn from it too. The question here is whether this is a one-time investment. So as I mentioned, all of Lumina's work really does focus in on the elimination of attainment gaps, and we will keep that focus as it has been. This is a one-time investment in its current form, so we don't have necessarily plans right now to, a year from now, invest in another Lumina fund. However, what I would say is that no door is ever closed, and if there is great work that comes out of this that spurs larger projects, or there's such great demand that I think we would love to really consider what comes next. And so we are viewing this very much with an open mind, very high expectations and high expectations of the potential of this investment to make a difference for many campuses. So I will say that we can't promise that a grant will come after this to any individual campus or to any other sort of venue like this. However, you can see many options on the horizon that indicate that there might be great potential for future investments in this space directly to campuses. And then finally, in terms of preference for the scale of these efforts, there's two qualifications on this question. It's a really good one, the scale. So what I think we'd like to see in terms of the reach of the work, we would love to see this reach as far across and as deep within the institution as possible. And by that we mean we're not necessarily looking to support dorms for 20 people or for a very specific, say, course or something like that. We would like this to have reach across the institution as much as possible, as well as deeply within the institution as possible, meaning that you'd want to engage as many actors across the institutions, students, administrators, faculty, staff, as possible. And then there's the question of departmental scale, and this was a pretty specific qualifier in this question, which is, do we want to see how many different departments do we want to see represented? Do we want to see academic affairs, student affairs, diversity offices, presidential leadership, et cetera, et cetera? And the answer to that question is that it's up to you. We want to see proposals that do go deep within the institution and show evidence that this is not a startup kind of thing, that there is widespread support for these efforts, but also you need to get work done, and that may require that you work more closely with some departments than others. And so we are open to your wisdom on this question and do not have firm expectations or a menu that you have to check about how many departments must be involved. And so with that, I will wrap this webinar. But I will ask that you continue to monitor luminafoundation.org. We'll post this webinar as well as an FAQ document, as well as the proposal that you saw today. And hopefully that will keep answering questions for you. In the meantime, between now and February 26th, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You'll see my email address here, or Meenakshi Abi, who's the Senior Manager of Sponsored Projects at Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. She, too, is available to answer your questions about particularly submission details and any of the documents required in the appendix, in the appendices alongside your proposal. So I hope that this was informative and helpful to you in your work, and we'll look forward to hearing from you over the next month or so, and really appreciate your incredible interest and engagement in this effort, and we thank you very much. Take care.